Good morning, everybody. We are live. Congratulations. You made it through the week. Another successful week of food safety. Another one in the bag of protecting the public and making sure that things go the way that they should. First off, glad you're here. This is the Food Safety Chat, and we come here live every Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, and we talk about a particular food safety topic. And if you're new to the chat, a couple of things here. First off, let us know where in the world you're at. So I am in beautiful Loveland, Colorado. And our guest today, Dr. Darin Detwiler, is sitting prominently outside of the SVA Theater in New York City. And those people in the background need to start moving. They're kind of static there, Darin. That's kind of a weird thing. But how are you doing today?
Good. I am coming live from New York. I am realistically, I'm a couple blocks away from the theater, but I will be at the SVA Theater in New York City this evening for the world premiere of the new Netflix documentary Poisoned: The Dirty Truth About Your Food.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so well, first off, thank you for joining us for this. I feel very honored that you were able to join us with this special chat here today and go over this documentary and some of the information around this. So Austin's joining us this morning. Claire, good to see you as well. Ahmed's here as well. Nice to see you. So one of the things you'll notice with the chat here, if you're brand new to this, I'm seeing lots of new faces here, which is amazing. This is great, Bana. Good morning. Is that this is not a lecture. This is an interactive talk, a chat, as it were. And with that, we're here to interact with you and answer your questions. So please, in the chat, let us know what you're thinking. And we'll respond to those things as well. Robert's here. Good to see you, Robert.
Hey, Robert.
Good guy, Robert. You gotta like Robert.
Austin, I forgot to say hello to you too, Austin.
And whenever here, Austin, we were talking about, of course, if we're sitting outside the theater, right, you're talking about movies. So, of course, with a name like Austin, so of course, the first thing to think about is just a little evil. I watched Goldmember on Netflix last night. Such a good movie. I mean, the whole trilogy was so good. It's too bad he hasn't been able to replicate that. But speaking of movies, I mean, our topic for today is a documentary and something that is of course, very near and dear to you and something that you've been highly involved in. And of course, that's, as you'd mentioned, Darin, Poisoned. And really, this is the story of E. coli and Jack in the Box. And for everybody out there, why don't you kind of give a little bit of background? Before we do, everybody, please join us for a ceremonial drink of your favorite beverage. And there we go. Don't know if you're able to get anything out there on the street or not. Oh, there we go. Nice save.
I have a hotel cup.
Oh, there we go. Morning, Jason, Ryan, and John. Good to see you. So, how about a little? As we're talking about, of course, this week is on Wednesday was World Food Safety Day, and then now the premiere of Poisoned at the theater. So, is it planned? I guess it's kind of. I mean, it seems like it, but was the premiere planned for this week with World Food Safety Day in mind, or?
It was originally supposed to come out earlier this year. I mean, it was set to come out for initially January, and then it was going to come out. This was going to be initially around the time of the actual 30th anniversary of the outbreak.
Mm-hmm.
But you're kind of left to the decisions of Netflix and the bigger parties involved, and for it to come out during the Tribeca Film Festival, I think is quite honestly a big accomplishment. We're talking about a scenario where there's only so many books. Beyond academic books and protocol books and law books, there's only so many books that talk about this topic, and there's nothing in terms of a documentary of this size until now that really focuses on this. And it's not about, it's not about Hollywood. It's not about I mean, this is a documentary. It's using archival footage and actual interviews with the people involved in it, including myself. Um, but it's about the idea of putting something out there such that the average viewer, the average person, can watch this, and it becomes kind of part of the fabric. So much of what we talk about in food safety. I mean, you've got a great uh, um, uh, production you do here with your Food Safety Chat Live. And though we have great attendance here with this, we have people. I see Alexis in San Diego, and some people I've worked with, Jason and Robert and Austin and other people. I see Wisconsin, I see Pittsburgh. It is a it is a limited community in terms of it's like a I don't know, a members in this group are those who are more impacted professionally, personally from this, and so it's kind of preaching to the choir. The idea of getting these messages out there to a wider audience, I believe, is paramount. The
Mm.
idea that those who are simply consumers being more aware of this, cutting through some of the mythologies or the social media hype and getting at the real information, I think is critical for consumers. I think that for those entering the food industry, whatever level, whatever type of position, for those audiences, for those pools of potential workforce members to be more aware about this, I think is also critical. I also think that for those who are working in food safety related capacities, it is validation. It's
Mhm.
validation and an awareness of what we do, and then I think if you look at the idea of food safety executives, leaders, supervisors, of FSQA leaders, things of roles of that nature. Um, perhaps it could serve as a wake-up call, if not a reminder, in terms of the why behind what they do.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So, for people that aren't familiar, so poison, tell us a little bit about this project, the documentary, kind of where we're at this point in time.
Sure. So, Poison, the documentary, is based off a book called Poisoned, written by Jeff Benedict. And this book was about the 1993 Jack in the Box E. coli outbreak. And it looked at many of the cases. It predominantly focused on the case of Brianna Kiner, who was the principal client of Bill Marler, the very well known lawyer. And so this book really looked at the idea of, here was an event that changed the way Americans eat. Here is what changed our view of, how we took for granted the safety of hamburgers, if you will, how the media became aware of and really started focusing on this, and how it ultimately changed our food safety culture. Uh, Netflix making a documentary based on this book wanted to go a little bit further with it and look at the idea of adding to the conversation, not just taking the book and we see this all the time. You have a book, you have a documentary, you have a book, and you have a movie. And I've seen movies where it's really only two chapters of the entire book, or I've seen movies where the entire book is just one act, and they go beyond the story. This is definitely what they've done with this documentary. They look at additional outbreaks, additional issues, everything from the Peanut Corporation of America to leafy greens and antibiotic-resistant salmonella with chicken, and they look at the role of the USDA and the FDA in food safety in the 3 decades since, and it also is an opportunity to look at what's the road ahead. But while there is archival footage used in this, what blows me away from this, and I was just very honored to be able to see an early version of this, uh, of the completed work here, is how many primary how much primary source material they have, how many people who were there, who are currently there, who are in these roles and working with these companies and working for these different agencies, they are interviewing throughout the documentary. So it's beyond opinion and beyond like secondary literature review of artifacts, and it really gets at some primary voices and primary evidence in terms of what is the state, what is the impact of this, and what really is this this invisible or dirty truth out there about our food today.
Yeah. And yeah, it's a good point. I mean, really, because a couple of things to kind of pull out of what you just said was number one is there's kind of this knowledge bubble that we live in relative to food safety. And as I talk with other food safety professionals, things like that, we go to conferences and we talk with each other and things like this. But as you and I have talked about before in the past too, the world of food safety is small, right? And especially when you get to the leadership side of things, vice presidents, et cetera, there's a small group of us out there and we pretty much know each other. And even with that, it's also segmented in that the produce people don't talk to the dairy people, don't talk to the meat people. You kind of live in that little semi-small world as well. And there's just certain things that we look at and assume and things like this. And I think too, your point on this is an extremely important one, because getting outside of that bubble and helping people to understand that when you're at the barbecue, well, there's a reason that sticker is on that package of meat that says you must cook to 165. There's a reason all these things developed. And all of these rules that have been in place now for a significant period of time are a direct result of what happened with Jack in the Box and this movie, right?
Well, and it's so easy for people to just accept, oh, there's that label, or there's that rule, or there's that situation, and not understand. I mean, the Food Safety Modernization Act. And I wrote about this in my book. Here's a cheap plug: Food Safety Past, Present, and Predictions, which actually, so I was able to serve to some extent as a technical consultant behind the scenes in the earlier days when they were developing this documentary, because again, they wanted to go beyond, what took place in the 30 years since, and that's what I wrote about in my book. Um, when I was researching for that book and I was talking with the people like Caroline Smith DeWall and Brian Ronholm and some other folks who were really at the forefront of watching Congress work to pass the Food Safety Modernization Act, looking at the people at Pew and Stop Foodborne Illness who were working to bring victims and their families, so that voice, that experience could be heard by legislators and their offices, how much that cost, how difficult that was, how much of a challenge it was to get that true burden of disease communicated from passionate, firsthand experience constituents, so that these legislators had the drive to pass this. And even to talk about the idea of the text that went back and forth between Carolyn Smith DeWall and Brian Ronholm, literally at the 11th hour, at the last on the last day of the congressional session, at a period of time where Congress was working to get the Affordable Care Act passed, and there was a big fear that the Food Safety Modernization Act would not be passed during that congressional session. Um, there's so much drama and so much human story behind what happens with these things that either the average consumer doesn't know about at all, or if they know about it, they just see it as what it is. Even those labels on meat, you look at packages that are sold of raw steaks, ground beef, poultry that say, refrigerate, cook properly, the standard food handling labels. That was new. That came out of it came out in 1994, but that was a byproduct, one of the many byproducts of the 1993 Jack in the Box E. coli outbreak. And that's where I was working with the USDA at the time. And even the drama around that, it seems so simple. Put a label on it. It says you should cook it thoroughly, refrigerate leftovers, and wash your hands. It was so divisive. There was so much pushback from industry at the time. How dare the federal government tell consumers there may be something wrong with your food, and how dare they tell them, that they have a responsibility. But then later you hear the industry saying, no, the consumers do have a responsibility in this. So again, things have changed. There's not an easy pathway to get changes in food safety and to get to the heart of what we're trying to do to make food as safe as possible. But what I have observed over the last 3 decades is that some 3,000 Americans die every year.
Mm-hmm.
3,000 times 30 years, that's 90,000 families, 90,000 sets of parents living with a chair forever empty at their family table. Um, and it's just one of those things where, and you and I talked about this in terms of conferences. We talk about food safety at food safety conferences, but we hear less and less about the from consumers that have been impacted by this. We hear less and less about the consumer perspective of things, and I think that this documentary does a great job of making sure that those voices are a prominent feature in telling this story.
Right. And I want to make sure too, as well as we kind of get into more of the details around this, Darin, is this project for you is not something that was, because you're a food safety expert, you were pulled in to help out with. This project is something that you're deeply personal tied to. For people who are unfamiliar with that, can you kind of give everybody a little bit of an idea of that?
Sure. I didn't know about, I mean, you know about food safety, right?
Mhm.
But do you know about food safety? You know what I mean? It's like you talk about these things, but you don't really understand it until you're kind of impacted by it.
Right.
And I never heard of the word E. coli until 1993 when my son got sick from E. coli. There was this outbreak. Initially, they didn't know it was tied to Jack in the Box. They didn't even know what it was tied to. As more and more information came out, you kept telling yourself, well, let's avoid hamburgers, or let's avoid Jack in the Box, or let's avoid restaurants in Seattle. And of course, my son was 16 months old. I had a 9-year-old son at the time, and I was under the assumption that he would be the child I would be more worried about because my 16-month-old was not eating a hamburger. Then to find out that there was another kid in my son Riley's daycare center who was sick with E. coli, and to learn all of a sudden now that you can get E. coli person to person, you don't even have to eat the contaminated product. My son gets sick, and I assumed he was going to eventually, recover from this. And the escalation over the series of a few weeks, he went from being sick to being hospitalized to being in intensive care to being airlifted to Children's Hospital in Seattle to going in for exploratory surgery where they ultimately had to remove a huge portion of his intestines.
Mhm.
And when he came out from that, he was in a medically induced coma. And then to watch, the monitors and just continuing to get worse and worse to the point where he literally had no oxygen going to his brain because of the impact of hemolytic uremic syndrome on his body. And when he died from something that I literally thought he was going to recover from, and I would be able to, I mean, he was 16 months old. His last words were "Baba" because he looked at the IV bottle hanging from a pole and thought it was his bottle. This is nothing I could explain to him. I assumed that newspaper clippings would be held on to, and there were people holding on to newspaper clippings. That someday I'd be able to talk with him about how brave he was. Explain to him what happened to him. And then to ultimately, watch him being carried in the world's smallest coffin as a result of this. Um, and 2 days later, to be in a situation where I'm talking to President Clinton on Air Force One.
Wow.
Um, 2 days after he died, in that time period between when he died and the funeral, to be talking to President Clinton, talking kind of father to father, what do we do about this? And I said something. I said two things. One is I said that I assumed that science and policy would take care of this, and we wouldn't be talking about food safety anymore. But I also said that I didn't want to be in a situation where, though I lost my son, I didn't want to be in a situation where my son lost his father. And here I
Mhm.
am 30 years later, between what I teach as a professor at Northeast University, what I write in columns and interviews and speaking and working with the many companies and conferences, talking about food safety, talking about technology behind food safety, talking about leadership, talking about so many different things. When I do this, I mean, it's never going to bring back my son, but it does provide an opportunity for me to find purpose in my son's death. And two, when you look at the idea of trying to build a legacy, and what does that mean? Working towards the legacy of the food safety industry, validating the work that's being done, supporting those who are doing that work, celebrating those who are literally doing the very thing that is worthy of them being labeled as a hero because of the Herculean effort, the enormous amount of work, strength, and courage that they put into food safety and that they inspire in others. I mean, that is the best thing that I can possibly do right now in terms of I mean, I'm never going to be able to get my son back, but I can at least try to help those who are trying to prevent other families from experiencing what my family did. And I have to tell you, it is. One could say it's rather pyrrhic in terms of the successes, but it is extremely fulfilling and an emotional, um, emotionally driven work. And I'm not the only one that does this. That's one of the reasons why this documentary, I think, is so powerful in terms of how it's going to motivate and validate and propel the work that so many people have been putting in, whether it is by choice in terms of their career or not by choice because of what their family's gone through.
Yeah. And yeah, I think the important part of this is, and thank you for sharing that with us, is that this allows us to move the information out of the academic realm into the realm of reality. Because a lot of times I think we forget and we get tied up in all the technical things that we do. Oh, yes, I have a degree in microbiology and I know all these type of things. Well, okay, that's nice. But we do all of this to protect people. And the more that we're able to bring that out of our bubble and teach people outside of the food safety realm and these type of things, where, in my opinion, most of us who do what we do in food safety do it because we choose to be here. We know it's difficult work. We know it has an incredible burden. We know it's a giant moral responsibility, and we do it anyway. And these type of films help to spread that message out there. And as you and I were preparing for this chat, Darin, you said something I thought was really good around this. Is you have said, like, as you're going out there and teaching people and really bringing this message out there, it's bringing people to the table, as you said, and sitting down with executives and showing them that, yeah, you're running a company and you're worried about the financials and the next IPO and whatever else, but these other things are as or more important than what you're thinking about here. Let me show you. So can you kind of expand on that a little bit?
Well, you tend to look at the numbers a lot. The numbers justify everything, whether it is economics or likelihood and severity, or the elements that you want to celebrate as a success in our companies. And I get it. We look at everything from newspapers talking about companies and their economic growth, or the New York Stock Exchange and the value of the stock, and everything is number driven. But I mean, and I'm carrying tonight a photo of my son, um, and there are faces and stories and names and families, and there are histories behind these numbers, and it's very easy to lose track of that. I have been called in to talk to state and county health departments, where I'll ask them, do you want me to talk about case studies? Do you want me to talk about my own son? And they'll say, yes, please do, because we have people that have worked here 5, 10, 15 years, and they don't actually talk to families. They just collect data and analyze data. And it's like you have to be tied to the real world element of that. And I sat down earlier this year with the current executives at Jack in the Box, and I mean, yeah, obviously there's a history there, but we can't ignore the fact that here's a company that tied to this outbreak has a legacy in terms of what they did in response to it. And I asked them quite blank, you can celebrate your successes and your achievements since then and talk about that in terms of your legacy. But what are you doing in terms of the legacy for the year 2053, 30 years from
Yeah.
now, when whoever is at the helm of this company will likely not have even been born then and will not have experienced what these families have gone through, what like my family, like with my son Riley. And that whereas it's easy to hold on to the bright moments and the numbers we want to the successful numbers that we want to celebrate, we have to make sure that we are really still embracing the true burden of disease as part of our compass in terms of driving what we want to be as our legacy going forward. We have to recognize those dark moments and even those conflicting themes as part of what we do. And I think that this documentary does a good part of that. There is a blend of celebrating successes while at the same time pointing out some of the failures and some of the why behind what companies are prioritizing, what they're
Mhm.
investing in, what they're training in, what they're doing now. Because again, we're doing these things now, most of these companies today. It's very easy to think that in the next 30 years you can lose track of that. When we see today, there are some companies that are being celebrated for even just yesterday, or I'm sorry, the day before on World Food Safety Day. There was a major company being celebrated for their food safety success, and that's great. But that food safety success came about after they had one of the more landmark level outbreaks of only a few years ago. And I'm
Mhm.
not trying to diminish what they've done since then, but here is the kind of big potential eye opener I'd like to see coming out of this documentary. Perhaps we don't have to wait until there's a major outbreak associated with our company, in which our company takes a major reputational hit. We lose trust in our consumers. We are dragged through the media. We're dragged into the courts. We have major federal government fines, and we're literally having to change what we do in terms of food safety as a result and response to a major failure. If a major failure happens, we do need to do that. But imagine if that much effort and prioritization and leadership was put into food safety before there
Mhm.
was a failure in food safety. One would imagine that um, the economics alone would be a good driving force, because doing this proactively would be far less expensive than doing it reactively.
Mhm.
And in terms of reputation, yes, consumers can become rather myopic and forget about, the actual cause about this. But so can your employees. And
Oh
over
yeah.
time, though you may be taking some major steps now, that legacy, if you will, that you put a lot of work into building and in response to an outbreak can easily be lost. And again, in a very short number of years, whether it's measured in on our fingers or in the number of decades or whatever, you can lose that decade, and it will undermine the decade. Or I'm sorry, you will lose that legacy, and it'll
Yeah.
undermine the legacy of your company. It'll undermine the legacy of those leaders in your company and those workers who put so much effort into it, and it'll also undermine the legacy of the number of people that worked as consultants and advisors and who really helped steer a company in the right direction in terms of what they do for food safety. So there's a lot to gain, but at the same time, without a strong compass that's driven by an understanding of the true burden of disease, there's also a lot to easily lose in terms of your company's legacy of food safety.
Right. No, well said. And so I think, so bringing those executives to the table. So if you're working in food safety in a company, one of your primary responsibilities is making sure that that educational piece, that thing that we're talking about here today, goes up to senior management so that they understand it. Because the reality is, when you look at the CEOs and the senior leadership teams of food companies, most of the time they come from sales or marketing or finance or things like this. They have no idea. They have no idea what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And we need to help educate them. And I think this is where films like this are incredibly powerful. And to your point, the idea here, and this is the challenge of what we do in food safety, is we're working in a negative. We're trying to prevent something from happening. And if it hasn't happened, it's very difficult to see it. And it's like wearing your seatbelt or something like this. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, you understand the risk. And even if you go back when we were kids, seatbelts, whatever, you wear it, maybe you don't. I'm just going to the store. It's 5 miles away or whatever. And now it's become ingrained in us as part of our culture. That's just like you just automatically, you put your belt on. You don't even think about it anymore. And food safety needs to become that as well, where it just becomes just part of the process of how we think about things, how we approach things. And we need to break out of this, well, our company's never had a problem before mentality. It's like, good. There's plenty of people out there who have, and they said the exact same thing that you did. So let's keep it from happening in the first place. And bringing those executives to the table and teaching them and really linking it back. And again, it's what we were talking about earlier too, Darin, is the more you can link something to the personal and say, this could be your grandchild just as easily as Riley. We need to make sure this never happens again, right? Numbers are nice, but we need to sometimes go to the other side and explain things from a personal level as well, because we're all people. We all eat. Everybody eats, and it impacts everyone. Looks like we're having a little bit of a buffering issue here with Darin outside the theater. Let me answer a couple of questions here as his camera catches up. So Austin, is it currently on Netflix? So with this premiere, it should be launching here. Oh, yeah, I can hear you. We were answering some questions here while delay was coming off. It looks like your mic is on mute now, Darin. So when will the show actually be available on Netflix? Hope you're muted here. Let me see if I can unmute you on my side. No, I can't. Sorry, everyone. Technical difficulties always when you're remote. Okay, the mute is off. Your picture is frozen. Jason had a question here. Can you post this link? So this link, what you're watching right now, is on live stream. So you'll be able to watch replays of this as well. Gotcha. So Austin asked a question. When will this be available on Netflix? Do you know?
I'm told this summer. It will be available this summer.
This summer. And in the meantime, the book is on Amazon. And so you can read the book. Summer. And so here's the link to what's currently available on Amazon. Ryan had a comment here. Speaking of poisoning, what are your thoughts on the horrible preservatives that are in our foods? Any thoughts around that for Ryan?
Are we back? I'm not sure if we're still buffering here.
You're looking good on my side.
Everything seems to be on a delay. In terms of horrible preservatives that are in our foods, I'll say this. I think when we talk about food safety, and you can talk about E. coli, you can talk about Listeria, Salmonella, hepatitis A, so many different things, right? Norovirus. I think we have to also make sure that we're aware of things like allergens. That there are so many consumers that are impacted by allergens, and I think that where I could easily get into a conversation about horrible preservatives, I think that the bigger issue here is that one of the big things that we've seen over the last 3 decades is consumers are considered to be stakeholders much more today than they were 3 decades ago. And that consumer preferences, consumer needs, consumers' questions around transparency and traceability, consumers are asking questions far beyond price and taste. They're looking at the idea of quality, of food safety, of issues surrounding food sustainability, food security, even food defense, and authenticity. The idea of is there accuracy in what it says on the label? These are things that people want to know today, and I think that one of the major shifts we've seen with consumers is that um, food is no longer just about what we eat. It's no longer just about how we come to the table, if you will. It's also about how we vote outside of the polls. Americans today literally are voting with their food money. They're voting in terms of what restaurants they go to, what grocery stores they go to, what brands they go to. We saw this with Chipotle, for instance, when they were losing a ton of profit, and it had nothing to do with lawsuits or federal government fines. It had to do with the fact that there were consumers that said that they had the ability, with this knowledge, to go elsewhere because the reputation was lost with this company. So, whether it is that idea of finding out what preservatives are in a food, or the lack of transparency around preservatives, or what those preservatives can do to the human body, or allergens, or foodborne pathogens, or ingredients or processes, things like GMO, things like locally organic, or farm raised, or whatever. There's a lot of different elements, even beyond ingredients, that people are asking about today, and consumers want more transparency around. And I believe that looking forward into the future, consumers are always going to continue to want, again, more transparency and more traceability, and more clarity in terms of what they are putting into their body and what they are spending their money on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as we've seen with the proliferation of information we can get on the internet, that's just going to continue with food. So you'll be able to look up online, where your food was made, and if you're buying a dairy product, what farm it came from, and what cows were, produced the milk that made that product. It's just going to be more and more and more. And so this is one of the risks that you have when you do a remote, is that sometimes you lose your connection. So hopefully Darin will be able to come back here in a bit. But to John's point here is that, let's see here, device not connected. Turn my phone back on here. It looks like Darin's trying to get back on. I'll see what we can do, because this is an amazing talk, and an amazing privilege to be able to have him here like this to talk about this premiere. But I mean, short-term, long-term risk, yeah, a lot of times, and a big chunk of this is the precautionary principle. And what are the potential risks versus the actual risks? And trying to balance these things is always a massive challenge. So let's try something here. Sorry, everybody, bear with me here. So the same link should work for him. And I'm going to, yeah, as John is saying here, technological advances. Yeah, there's all kinds of entrepreneurial companies out there that are coming up with new things. So you would imagine very soon, within the next 10 years or so, that consumers are going to be able to test for pathogens at home, and using some type of genetic marker test or something like this to be able to test right when they're ready to eat the food, to make sure that everything is safe there. So I'm going to try and interesting. So I'm going to do some technical things here behind the scenes. So if you're a regular to the chat, you will know that these things happen every now and then, and make him aware that the same link should work. And hopefully he'll be able to rejoin here. We'll stay here on the line for a little bit. If not, we'll have to cut it a little bit short, which kind kind of stinks, so I don't want to do that. This is kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity here with Dr. Detwiler to talk about these things. And really, kind of what we were talking about here, I'll kind of continue along on this line as well, is that events like this and essentially the marking of this, right? There's certain events that we remember. And for me, I remember this E. coli. I was just starting out in my career in food safety. I was a microbiologist at the time. And so for me, this really hit close to home. Interesting. He's trying to reconnect here and it won't let him. Well, I don't know why this isn't working. So I think instead of wasting everybody's time, I'm just going to have to end the chat here now. But really, I mean, the main points out of this, right? The premier with Poisoned, Dr. Detwiler and the amazing work he has done over his career to promote food safety and really bringing it out of the technical realm of what we do and helping to teach people outside of the food safety realm what they need to be doing on their side as well. And we all do it when we work in food safety. Aha. There we go.
All right, we've tried an alternate way.
That works quite well. So you were able to run it off the street into your hotel room?
Yes, miraculously.
So I was just kind of summarizing some of the key points that we were talking about here, which is, you know, the validation of all the work that we've been doing in these areas, how this documentary is going to help get this information out of our bubble and into the public side of things and teaching people, right? So when somebody is at home and they're cutting up chicken on a cutting board, they don't use the same cutting board for their lettuce. These type of things are just, you know, those small changes in people's lives. And as we had talked about as well, is one of the things that we do in food safety, and this is just automatic, it's part of who we are, and I'm sure everybody will laugh in the comments around this, is that going to restaurants is always an adventure, right? Because you can't turn it off. And if you see the waiter, you know, he's coming to your table and he's got his thumb inside your mug, you're like, no, go take that back. I would like something different, please. And you hope that when he goes back behind the back of the kitchen that he actually does that and he doesn't turn around and just bring it back out to you. So it's kind of that awareness, right?
Well, it's also awareness of the stuff that goes on, but that you don't see, the you know, the things behind the scenes, right? Whether it be the lack of temperature and time control of items that are received at the loading dock, whether it is the refrigeration temperatures of the items, you know, behind the scenes. You know, these are things that we take for granted. You know, there's different kind of restaurants. There's some restaurants where mystery happens behind closed doors. There's other kind of diners where you see this stuff play out right in front of you. You literally see the eggs being cracked, the potatoes being cut, the bacon sizzling, the pancakes being poured, you know, in certain diners, or the sandwich being assembled right in front of you. And that's not done without an awareness of the fact that, you know, whether it is the watching of that being, you know, the sandwich being built in front of you, or looking at those fresh ingredients still in the eggs, as opposed to questioning, did it come out of a carton, you know, kind of a situation. This is the state of I believe, consumers today in terms of where we are with food. You know, if you go back, let's say around 2015, there were two key things that happened. One is that we started to see more outbreaks and recalls associated with foods regulated by the FDA than with the USDA. Because back 30 years ago, when we talked about food safety, we were talking about meat and poultry. The second thing is the U.S. Department of Labor and Statistics, the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics, their data showed that for the first time in American history, Americans were spending more food money on food that's prepared outside of the house than on food that be prepared inside the house. So you not only have food that is multiple ingredients, like your commercially packaged goods and your ready-to-eat foods with multiple ingredients, and ingredients that are coming from far distances across different states, coming from different countries. But you have a locus of control that has shifted. We're no longer in control of how food is prepared nearly as much as we were in the past. So, you brought up the idea of seatbelts. And this documentary focuses on the idea of the hidden dangers in our food, the dirty secret, if you will, right? As parents, we say things like, look both ways before you cross the street, make sure you wear your seatbelt. But we're a society now that lives with the fact that we don't just have a seatbelt, we have airbags. And using this analogy, if we look at the difference between believing in food safety and valuing food safety, it's almost as if those who think, I don't need to wear a seatbelt because worst case scenario, my airbag will go off. That's like having a belief in food safety. Worst case scenario, they won't figure out what company it comes from, or the numbers won't be that big, or we'll probably be fine as a company. But those who value it, those who measure food safety, they do a lot of independent and third-party auditing. They do practice or test recalls. They do focusing on reevaluating the likelihood and severity and their protocols. They really measure what they value on a regular basis. And this is where you see not only growth in terms of trust and a corporate development of this legacy of food safety, and it impacts them economically. It impacts them whether it's in terms of insurance and investments, obviously avoiding the costs associated with losing your reputation. But it does build a consumer trust around that. So that's one of the things I talk about, and one of the things that I hope comes out through this documentary. It's not about believing, well, there's always airbags. It's about valuing the need to proactively put on a seatbelt in terms of food safety, to proactively take in consideration the true likelihoods and the true severities, not just some people may get sick, but the idea that some people may die. The idea that some people may get sick, some people may be discharged from a hospital, and some people may live with lifelong medical conditions, and their quality of living is nothing like they ever had before they were harmed as a result of a failure in food safety. Yeah. This is where value really comes into play. And that shift from belief to value is, I think, quite honestly, not only something that I hope this documentary supports, but something when companies look at the idea of saying they want to have a good legacy around food safety, that they make that shift from belief to value.
Yeah. Well, and another quick little thought around the seatbelt analogy is Volvo, right? Volvo is linked to car safety, and they went out and they actively campaigned, and they invented the seatbelt. And they said, we're not going to patent this. We're going to share this with every other car company so that they can incorporate this technology too. And they went out there and they pushed that message, and they had commercials showing crash simulations and the dummies and how their cars protect you and your family and these type of activities. But when it comes down to it, right, in our current marketplace, does Volvo really do anything different than other car companies are doing? Well, maybe not. But they've done a fantastic job of putting that message out there and educating the consumers on the importance of safety in your car. And to your point, Darin, the value of that, right? This is what you use to protect your family. Food safety is no different.
Yeah. And, I think that, again, we have companies that change their tune after a major outbreak has tied to them, and they've been dragged through the media, they've been dragged through the courts, they've been put under the microscope of the government, things like that nature. We can look at, you were talking about seatbelts. The Army looked at how many personnel they were losing during World War II because they weren't wearing seatbelts in their Jeeps. And that's where we have a major change in that. Even the USDA came about because of the Civil War, because they realized the federal government had to do more to make sure that there was the adequate supply of food to the troops. We do so many things in response and reaction to, and we're very much, the last 30 years of food safety, 30 years ago, I thought that this will be something that ends. This will be something that, we see an end to. But the reality is we've seen an endless cycle of failure and reform in a reactionary kind of situation. And I think that, I've said this publicly, that it's as if with the absence of a memorial to food safety victims, this documentary perhaps serves as the largely, accessible, open to the public version of an awareness about food safety out there. And, it's crazy. Here I am in New York, and I was thinking about the 9/11 memorial, and I do not want to make light of or take away from what happened, the events of 9/11. But, here's a memorial to the some 3,000 people that died that day. And yet with food safety, there's some 3,000 people that die every year. Mm-hmm. And we have nothing like a memorial for that. And I'm not saying we need a physical memorial, but the idea of something that is going to be very visible in terms of the fact of acknowledging what we've lost along the way, those who've been harmed, those families who will live with a chair forever empty at their family table, but also those who put their careers on hold, but they change their careers. They focus their career to be those people that try to make sure that food is as safe as it possibly can be, day in and day out. These are a lot of people that you and I have run into and worked with at conferences. And it's a lot of the same people. And I'm so proud of their work. And it's as if most people have no idea that that these jobs even exist, or that these heroes work for them day in and day out. And, we don't wear capes in this industry. Probably would be problematic in terms of food safety. But in the concept is this idea, the theoretical idea of those who really should be wearing capes in terms of the heroic work they do. I hope that this documentary helps validate that work and these many people, some of which are right here on in our audience right here. Yeah. I hope that this really helps. It really helps support and validate the work that they do, and maybe it helps redefine some other people who are looking at their work and trying to find meaning in what they do, and realize that there are so many people who, they may not know your name. They may not be able to describe what you do, but they are so thankful and so appreciative of how safe you've made them and how you've made an impact on their families. And, this is one of the things that I talk about at conferences and with corporations, is the idea of food safety as this kind of, it's not only an invisible threat, but it's an invisible task.
Yeah.
And I hope that this documentary exposes it.
And going back to kind of our theme around this, a generation is 27 years. And so this happened over 30 years ago, right? There's an entire new generation of people out there who were not even born when this happened. And part of what I take great pleasure and value in, associated with my career now, is to this point in time where we're trying to transfer our information to this next generation of young food safety professionals who are coming up. Because in the US, this isn't something you go to school for. It's like, oh, I'm going to major in food safety. No, you're majoring in something else. And I bet, 99% of the people on the chat with us, you kind of go into this area. And you then become educated in this. Myself, right? I started off as a microbiologist and kind of went down this path, and it's led to this very fulfilling career for me. And my hope is, Darin, is that when young people who are in college or just starting out in their careers in food manufacturing or quality assurance can look at this and say, "Wow, I had no idea. This is something that's important. This is something of value. And this is something I want to continue on." And these key milestones, and really the whole Jack in the Box E. coli issue and the whole crisis with that and the tragic loss of life, all of these activities were a defining moment. And we need to make sure that the next generation of people understand these key moments. To your point, 9/11, the Challenger disaster, Jack in the Box, these type of issues stick with us. And we need to, and I think that's why this documentary is so important, is taking this out of the realm of the abstract and moving it into the personal so that people can understand why this is important and how this impacts them directly. And that applies to everyone, because once again, we all eat and we all enjoy food. So doing that going forward, I think is super important. And really, I think you've done a great job of summarizing this, but as we're kind of closing out our chat here today, and I think you've done a great job of saying this, but I'm going to ask the question again anyway, because I think it's so important, is so for the people who are joining us or listening to this later when this is recorded and reviewing this, what do you want people to take away from this, really?
For the executives, I'd like to see that there's validation and a call to action.
Yeah.
For those who work in food safety, I would love to assume that they see some validation in terms of acknowledging the invisible Herculean effort that they put into food safety. In terms of those who are beginning or have only been working in the food industry for a little bit, I hope that there is some evidence and some substance behind when they're asked to do things around food safety, that it's not just some meaningless hoop that they're asked to jump through. And for consumers, I hope that this generates conversation and propels them to ask questions and to demand more transparency around food safety, and to realize that this is not something that was back then, or that's only over there, or that only impacts those people, or that's only associated with that kind of food, that everyone can become sick and fall victim to a food safety failure. And you do not want to end up like some of the most vulnerable populations who don't just get sick and have an inconvenient reaction to it, but again, who can live with a life forever changed as a result of this, or who can live with the chair forever empty at their family table.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. So I think that's the perfect way to end our chat today. And thank you, everybody, for putting up with the technical issues and sticking through it. As you can
I
tell,
blame the fires up in Canada and all the smoke in the air here.
There you go. And thank you, Darin, for sharing this moment with us and joining the chat here for this very important point in your life as well, with the premiere of this movie and this documentary. And I'm really looking forward to seeing this on Netflix and learning more about this and using this then as a tool to help share the message and get it out there to people who may not be aware of this. And so this was fantastic. I hope you have a wonderful time at the premiere. Enjoy the fruits of all your efforts as well, Darin. And
thank you very much. I've got my tickets. And again,
I got that QR code now.
Picture of my son.
And yep, with that, we'll end. And everybody, we'll see you back here next Friday for the next food safety chat at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern. In the meantime, enjoy your weekends. Have a great time. And thank you for all you do for food safety. And we'll see you back here next time. All right. And thank you very much, Darin. And we'll talk to you soon.